here in America. Listening to Bernie that day inspired me to get going in politics and make a difference. His actions has inspired youth across the nation in order to fight against inequality. And I know I am not alone in that regard. And as I am gathering from this crowd, there are many of those individuals who will fight against inequality here today. So, on behalf of the University Democrats and on behalf of the youth who will fight against inequality, I am honored to have the good senator from the state of Vermont here in Iowa City, Iowa!
Hello there, everyone. I'm Austin Wu, and I'm a junior here at the University of Iowa from Cedar Rapids studying public health. The series of events that eventually brought me here began almost 4 years ago. I remember sitting in the office of my high school with a friend sometime in the spring of 2015. Imagine that. For reasons long forgotten, I swear I wasn't in trouble. When he asked me if I knew who Bernie Sanders was, I didn't. Upon further research, however, I was intrigued by his lifelong and steadfast dedication to combating income inequality and slate of issues he ran on: a higher minimum wage, universal health care, paid family leave, and perhaps a little less well known, offering a safe alternative to risky payday loans through postal banking. I went on to serve as a precinct captain for his campaign during my first ever caucus in 2016. Fast forward 3 years, and those issues that I mentioned earlier are just as important, now more than ever. He has been the catalyst for a new wave of progressive candidates, ideas, and policies that seek to reverse this new gilded age that has denied millions of Americans the better life they deserve, and so gravely threaten our nation's future. That is why I'm proud to welcome Senator Sanders here back to the great state of Iowa. But before that, there is one more person coming up here to speak, someone who is part of that new wave of candidates inspired to run for office by Bernie Sanders. Give a warm welcome to Jody Clements.
Thank you. So if I were to have to choose one word to describe my introduction to Bernie Sanders, that word would have to be reluctant. Bernie was coming to town for a rally, and my husband was begging me to go with him. I reluctantly agreed under two conditions. We were going to sit in the back, and I was not giving them my email address. As Bernie began going through his platform point by point, I found myself resisting the urge to cheer. As he spoke truth to power about income inequality, health care system, and an inequitable justice system, I pictured the faces of the families that I knew. The countless spaghetti dinner fundraisers and GoFundMes that I had contributed to for healthcare expenses. Financial clients who were working full-time jobs off the farm just to afford health insurance. Small business owners who were taking classes right here at the university to be able to be on student health. And the dozens of families I knew that were living paycheck to paycheck. Bernie understood. By the end of that 45-minute speech, I was on my feet in full support. Bernie made it very clear throughout his campaign that this was not about him, it was about us. Me and you, working together to reclaim our democracy and build an economy that works for all of us, not just the wealthy few. He said to each of us, He said, get informed, get involved, and run for office. And thousands of us across the United States did just that. In early 2017, I watched as our state house here in Iowa went after union rights, workers' rights, and voters' rights. So I decided to run for the Iowa House. By following Bernie's lead, we accomplished so much. We brought new faces into the process from all sides of the political spectrum, and we built an amazing team of volunteers, many of which I see here. We put a bird on it and raised $70,000 from over 1,000 individual donors in our district without PAC money. Door to door, we spread awareness on the Fight for 15, Medicare for All, and campaign finance reform. We ran a bold progressive agenda, and nearly 45% of our rural district agreed. After the election, a friend came up to me and said, "Aren't you a little relieved that you didn't win?" I paused for a minute. Was I? No. How could I be? The same problems that brought me into this fight continue today. The political revolution isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. My fight continues, and judging by the size of this crowd, I'd say yours does too. Bernie has already won over the nation with his policy proposals of a $15 minimum wage and Medicare for all. In 2020, it's up to all of us to help him win the White House. My name is Jody Clemens, and it is with great honor that I bring to the stage a man who continues to inspire us all, our next President of the United States, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you, Iowa City. Thank you. Thank you. Let me begin by thanking Jody for that beautiful love you too. And let me thank Elizabeth Moen and her band. Let me thank Tegan Rader and Austin Wu for their comments. And let me thank you for coming out this evening. What a fantastic turnout. My only regret is we didn't get a larger room because there are about 500 people in the overflow. So we thank them very much for being here as well. I am excited to welcome you to a campaign which will be unprecedented in the history of the United States of America. This is a campaign which is not only going to win the Democratic nomination, is not only going to defeat Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in modern American history. But this campaign is about more than that. This campaign, with your help, is about transforming this country and creating an economy and a government that works for all, not just the 1%. Tonight, I want to welcome you to a campaign which says loudly and proudly that the underlying principles of our government will not be greed, kleptocracy, hatred, and lies. The underlying principles of our government will not be racism, sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, and religious bigotry. All of that is going to end. The principles of our government will be based on justice. Economic justice, social justice, racial justice, and environmental justice. Tonight, I want to welcome you to a campaign which tells the very powerful special interests who control so much of our economic and political life that we will no longer tolerate the greed of Wall Street, the greed of corporate America, and the greed of the billionaire class. And that greed has resulted in a moral dilemma for this country. And that is now we have more income and wealth inequality in America today than since the 1920s, and it is more unequal here than in any other major country on earth. No, we will not stand idly by and allow 3 families in America, 3, to own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. While at the same time, 20% of our children live in poverty, veterans sleep out on the streets, and seniors cannot afford the prescription drugs they need. We will no longer accept 46% of all new income going to the top 1%, while millions of people in Vermont and Iowa and all over this country are forced to work 2 or 3 jobs just to pay the bills. We will no longer accept a situation in which, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, our younger generation, i.e. you, will, unless we change it, for the first time in the modern history of this country, have a lower standard of living than your parents. Unacceptable. I have 4 kids and 7 grandchildren. downward mobility is not acceptable to me. It is not acceptable to the American people. This campaign is about moving our people up, not down. But it is not only a grotesquely unequal distribution of wealth that we are concerned about. It is not only a collapsing middle class. It is not only tens of millions of people living in poverty. Not only do we have to create a just economy, we also have to deal with a corrupt political system. We hold the radical idea that democracy means one person, one vote, not billionaires spending hundreds of millions of dollars to buy elections and elect the candidates who support their interests. And that is why we are going to overturn Citizens United. It is why we are going to move toward public funding of elections, because I want any of you who are thinking of running for office, whether it's school board or president. Don't run for president now, let me do that. But I want you to be able to run for office without being dependent on wealthy campaign contributors. I want you to run for office based on the ideas that you have, not the money that you can raise. Tonight, I want to offer a very special thanks to the people of the great state of Iowa. In 2016, this is where the political revolution began. Thank you, Iowa. When I first came here to campaign 4 years ago, not a whole lot of people in Iowa knew who the junior senator from Vermont was. I think that's fair to say. And in fact, when we began the campaign, we were at 3% in the polls. Further, the ideas that we were talking about then were considered by establishment politicians and mainstream media to be radical and extreme ideas. Ideas, they said, that nobody in America would support. Raising the minimum wage to a living wage, too radical. Too radical. Couldn't be done. Guaranteeing health care to all as a right, not a privilege. Too radical. Creating up to 15 million jobs by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure with a $1 trillion investment. Too radical. Trying to save the planet by aggressively combating climate change. Too radical. Reforming our broken criminal justice and immigration systems. Too radical. And here's one that was way, way out there. Not taking money from super PACs. Much too radical. How could you possibly run a campaign with small donations and not have to beg the rich and the powerful for their money? Ending the power of superdelegates at the Democratic Convention. You know, last time before the first vote was cast here in Iowa, my opponent then had 500 superdelegate votes. 500 superdelegates. Well, talking about ending that was too radical as well. Well, a funny thing happened in Iowa over that year. On caucus night, we didn't win 3% of the vote. We won 50% of the vote. And that great start here in Iowa led us to victories in 22 states across the country. Got us 13 million votes, over 1,700 delegates to the Democratic Convention, and maybe, to my mind, most significantly, we ended up winning more votes from young people than Trump and Clinton combined. And by the way, those ideas that we talked about here in Iowa 4 years ago that seemed so radical at that time, well, today, virtually all of those ideas are supported by a majority of the American people. And they are ideas that Democratic candidates from school board to presidential candidates are running on today. And all of that began right here in Iowa. Thank you, Iowa. Iowa began the political revolution in 2016, and with your help on this campaign, we are going to complete what we started right here. Today, as we begin our campaign here in Iowa, we say to the private health insurance companies, whether you like it or not, the United States will join every other major country on earth and guarantee health care to all people as a right, not a privilege. All Americans are entitled to go to a doctor when they are sick, whether they are rich or poor. They are entitled not to go bankrupt after going into the hospital. We will no longer continue a dysfunctional healthcare system which forces us to pay twice as much per capita as almost any other major country on earth, while at the same time our life expectancy is going down and our healthcare outcomes are not as good as other countries. The goal of healthcare must be to provide quality care to all Americans in a cost-effective way, not tens of billions of dollars in profits for the insurance companies, and outrageous compensation packages for the CEOs of the insurance companies. Just listen to this. In 2017, at a time when 30 million people in this country are uninsured, even more are underinsured, the top 65 healthcare CEOs made $1.7 billion in compensation, including $83 million to the man who is the CEO of United Health Group. We need a healthcare system that invests in disease prevention, that makes sure that we have the doctors and the nurses and the dentists in communities where they are needed. We don't need a system which makes insurance companies and their CEOs incredibly rich. So I say, tonight I say to the private insurance companies, I know that you have unlimited amounts of money, and I know the ugly 30-second ads that will be on television, but whether you like it or not, this country will pass a Medicare for all, single-payer healthcare system. And today, we say to the partners in crime of the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical industry, that you in the pharmaceutical industry will no longer continue to rip off the American people and charge us by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. When we talk about a dysfunctional healthcare system, it's not just that CEOs make tens of millions of dollars a year, money which should be going to provide healthcare to people. It is the absurdity. Think about this for a moment, that in America today, 1 out of 5 people who get a prescription from their doctor cannot afford to fill that prescription because of the high price of the medicine they need. Think about that. How crazy is that? People are sick, they go to the doctor, they cannot afford the medicine they need. So we say to the insurance companies and we say to the drug companies, a new day is coming in America for healthcare. And tonight, we say to Walmart, owned by the wealthiest family in America, we say to the fast food industry, and we say to low-wage employers all across this country, stop paying your workers starvation wages. Here in Iowa and throughout America, there are workers trying to get by on $8, $9, $10 an hour, and the truth is you cannot live with dignity on those starvation wages. Yes, we are going to raise the federal minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour. It is not a radical idea to say that if somebody works 40 hours a week, that person should not be living in poverty. And we are going to make it easier for workers to join unions, not harder. Now, I want to say a word about the progress that we're making on this issue. And again, it started right here in Iowa. 4 years ago, when we talked about the idea of a $15 an hour minimum wage, it seemed like an impossible dream. Well, since then, I am happy to tell you that 5 states in this country have passed legislation raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And I am very proud to tell you that in the House of Representatives, U.S. House of Representatives, just a few days ago, the House Labor and Education Committee passed out a bill which will raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. And I expect that bill to be passed in the next few weeks. And in the Senate, the legislation that I have offered, the same legislation has some 30 co-sponsors. That bill is going to come to the Senate. We need your help to tell Senators Grassley and Ernst that they have got to raise the minimum wage. Today, we say to the American people that we will rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. This is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. Our roads and our bridges and our wastewater plants and our water systems and our rail system should not be crumbling. They should be cutting edge, leading the rest of the world. And when we rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, we can create up to 15 million good-paying jobs. And let me be clear, when I talk about infrastructure and clean water, we're talking about strengthening clean water laws so that corporate polluters stop poisoning the drinking water that communities in Iowa and across the country rely on. You know, it is, again, this is America. When you turn on the water tap in your home, whether you live in Iowa or Flint, Michigan, you have a right to expect that the water that you drink is clean. Today, we say to the parents in this country that we know that the most important years of human development are 0 through 4. That's when human beings grow intellectually and emotionally. And we are going to end the dysfunctional child care system, the unaffordable child care system. Working parents deserve to know that there is good quality, affordable child care available for their children. That is not a radical idea. And today we say to our young people that we want you, we need you to get the best education that you can, not only for yourselves, but for the country. And that is why we will make public colleges and universities tuition free. How many of you right here this evening are dealing with student debt? You know, just stop and think again. Think outside of the box. You know, we take it for granted. Working class kids go to college, they graduate deeply in debt. That is insane. You should not have to mortgage your future for the crime of getting a college education. And that is why we are going to substantially lower student debt in this country. And today we say to our senior citizens, we understand that you cannot live on $12,000 or $13,000 a year Social Security. So not only are we going to beat back the Republican effort to cut Social Security, we're going to expand Social Security benefits. You know, Donald Trump, he embarrasses us every single day. Trump told the working people of Iowa and Vermont and this country that he was going to stand with them. I know it will shock you when I tell you he lied. President Trump, you don't stand with working people when you told them you were going to provide health care to everybody, and then you pushed legislation that would have thrown 32 million Americans off of the health care that they have. You're not standing with working families when you give 83% of the tax benefits in your tax bill to the 1%. You're not standing with working people when you told them you would not cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, but then brought forth a budget which called for a $1 trillion cut to Medicaid, $500 billion to Medicare, and $72 billion to the Social Security Disability Fund. That is not standing up for working people. But it's not only bad enough that we have a president who is a pathological liar. We have a president who rejects science. So I say to Donald Trump and the fossil fuel industry, climate change is not a hoax, but is an existential threat to our country and the planet. And together, we must and will transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And when we do that, we're also going to create millions of good-paying jobs. This issue of climate change is a profound moral issue because all of us have a moral responsibility to make certain that the planet that we leave to our children and our grandchildren is a planet that is healthy and habitable. Tonight, we say to the prison industrial complex that we are going to bring about real criminal justice reform in this country. This is America. We should not be having more people in jail than any other country on earth, including China. Instead of spending $80 billion a year locking up fellow Americans, we have got to invest in our young people, in jobs and education, not jails and incarceration. And when we talk about real criminal justice reform, we're talking about no more private prisons and detention centers. No corporation, no business should be making money by locking up fellow Americans. We are going to end the war on drugs that has destroyed so many lives. And I'm very happy to tell you that in that area, we are making significant progress. State after state is passing legislation to either decriminalize or legalize possession of marijuana. And there are communities around this country who are beginning to expunge the records of those people arrested for marijuana possession. Many of you don't know this. I didn't know this until a couple of years ago. That there are tonight hundreds of thousands of people in jail all over this country. You know what their crime is? Their crime is that they are too poor to come up with cash bail. This is 2019. We should not be having dead-up prisons. We're going to end cash bail. You know, when we talk about criminal justice reform, we are going to change a system in which tens of thousands of Americans every single year get police records because of possession of marijuana. But not one major Wall Street executive went to jail for the crime of destroying our economy in 2008. Seems kind of strange to me that a kid gets a criminal record for smoking marijuana, but when crooks on Wall Street destroy the lives of millions of people through their illegal activities, their punishment, so-called, is a $1 trillion bailout. We're going to change that type of system. Today, we say to the American people that instead of demonizing the undocumented immigrants in this country, we are going to pass comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. We are going to provide legal protection to the 1.8 million young people who are eligible for the DACA program. And we are going to develop a humane border policy for those who seek asylum. America must never be a country in which babies are snatched away from their mothers at the border. Today, we say to the top 1% and to the large, profitable corporations in this country, people, by the way, who have never, ever had it so good, that under our administration, we are going to end the massive tax breaks and loopholes that they currently enjoy. Amazon, just to give you one example, Amazon is, one of the largest corporations in this country, made over $10 billion in profit last year. It is owned by the wealthiest person in the world. Anybody here know how much Amazon paid in taxes last year? You got it, 0. Well, guess what, Amazon? That is going to end. We will no longer tolerate large, profitable corporations paying 0 in federal taxes, stashing their profits and their wealth in the Cayman Islands and in other tax havens. The wealthy and large corporations in this country will start paying their fair share of taxes. The time is long overdue to end austerity for working families. The time is now to provide a little austerity to the 1% and the large multinational corporations. And today we say to the military-industrial complex that we will not continue to spend $700 billion a year on the military, more than the next 10 nations combined. We are going to invest in affordable housing. We're going to invest in public education. And we're not going to be continuing the kinds of investment we have seen in recent years in nuclear weapons and never-ending wars. My friends, we are going to win this election, not because we have a super PAC funded by billionaires. We don't have a super PAC, never will have a super PAC. We are going to win this election because we are going to put together the strongest grassroots coalition in the history of our country. Donald Trump and his political allies want to divide us up by the color of our skin, by our country of origin, by our gender, by our religion, and by our sexual orientation. This campaign is going to do exactly the opposite. We are going to bring our people together, black and white, Latino, Asian American, Native American, gay and straight, young and old, men and women, native born and immigrant. We are going to bring our people together for an unprecedented grassroots campaign, which I am proud to tell you that in the 2 weeks we have been in this campaign, we now have over 1.1 million people signed up to work on this campaign. As the senator from Vermont, one of the most rural states in this country, let me be very honest with you and tell you that the United States Congress has, for too long, ignored the many, many crises facing rural America. In Iowa and in Vermont and all over this country, we have seen more and more young people leave the small towns they grew up in, the towns that they love, not because they didn't want to stay, but because there were no decent jobs available for them. In rural America, we have seen schools and churches and community centers shut down, and once vibrant main streets become boarded up and deserted. In Vermont, in Iowa, and all across rural America, we have seen family farmers by the tens of thousands go out of business as the prices they receive for their products decline rapidly and large agribusiness corporations and factory farming take over agriculture. We have seen rural hospitals and nursing homes shut down, and we have seen communities where there are no doctors or nurses to provide the quality care those communities deserve. Tragically, instead of seeing good-paying jobs, quality education, and good health care coming into our rural communities, we are far too often seeing despair and depression and a terrible increase in suicide and opioid addiction. My friends, we need policies for rural America that represent the needs of working families and farmers, not agribusiness and multinational corporations. Among many other things that need to be done is for the federal government to enforce antitrust legislation. And I will appoint an attorney general who will do just that. It is not acceptable that the top 4 packing companies control more than 80% of the beef market, 63% of the pork market, and 53% of the chicken market. And these numbers understate the reality. In many communities, there is really only one buyer, which means farmers are at their mercy. Farmers must use that corporation's feed and livestock. They must accept that corporation's costs, and they must accept that corporation's lower and lower payment rates. In many cases, farmers in this country don't even own the livestock or supplies. They are, for all intent and purposes, contract employees who are forced to lease everything and then get paid an inadequate wage for doing extraordinarily hard work. Let me give you just a few examples. Independent pork producers here in Iowa have been put out of business, and slaughterhouse workers have seen their wages remain flat for 30 years. And yet, when we talk about corporate greed, last year alone, the CEO of Smithfield's parent company was given a $291 million pay package. Farmers unable to get a decent price for their product, and the owner, the CEO of Smithfield, getting a $291 million pay package. Brothers and sisters, we are going to end those outrages. With the federal government not enforcing antitrust laws, we have seen mergers like Bayer, Monsanto approved, giving the two largest conglomerates 78% of the corn seed market. Meanwhile, instead of protecting family-owned farms, federal support for agriculture is skewed toward large factory farming. The top 10% of farms currently get 77% of all subsidies. All of us who come from rural states know how beautiful our communities are and how so many people have had such great lives growing up on farms and in those communities. And I pledge to you to do everything that I can to restore the well-being of rural communities all across this country. You know, we have a lot of talk in campaigns and a lot of rhetoric in campaigns, so I want to be as specific as I can and tell you some of what I intend to do when we together are in the White House. Because, as I've said many times recently, this campaign is not about me, it is about us. When we are in the White House, we will enact a federal jobs guarantee to ensure that every person in this country who is able to work is guaranteed a stable job. There is an enormous amount of work to be done in this country, in education, in healthcare, in infrastructure, in rebuilding, in transforming our energy system. An enormous amount of work to do. Let us do it. When we are in the White House, we will not only end the decline of rural America, but attack the problem of urban gentrification and build the affordable housing that we desperately need. All over this country, can you imagine, people are spending 40 or 50% of their income in order to put a roof over their heads. We're going to end that because we're going to build the affordable housing this country needs. When we are in the White House, we will move aggressively to end the epidemic of gun violence in this country. And pass the common sense gun legislation that the overwhelming majority of American people want to see happen. When we are in the White House, we're not only going to end the national disparities in terms of wealth and income, but we will address the racial disparities of wealth and income. And we are going to root out institutional racism wherever it exists. Not only are we going to end voter suppression, we're going to make it easier for people to vote, not harder. If you are an American citizen and 18 years of age, we're going to automatically register you to vote. End of discussion. When we are in the White House, we are going to protect a woman's right to control her own body. That decision does not belong to the federal government. It does not belong to the state government. It does not belong to the local government. It belongs to the women of this country. That's their bodies. Please make no mistake about it. The struggle that we are engaged in is not just about defeating Donald Trump. This struggle, and I want all of you to understand, because you don't see much of this on the media and certainly not discussed in Congress, but what this struggle is about is taking on the incredibly powerful institutions that control the economic and political life of this country. And I can tell you that they have endless amounts of money available for them to protect their financial wealth and their power. And when I talk about powerful special interests, let me lay it on the line, okay? Because you got to know what you're getting involved in. I'm not going to be somebody who wants to win an election and then not accomplish anything. It'd be worse not to run for office than to do that. But we got to know what this fight is. And it's not just establishment Democrats, it's not just the entire Republican Party. We are taking on in this campaign Wall Street and the fact that you have 6 financial institutions that have assets equivalent to 54% of the gross domestic product of this country. 6 financial institutions. We're talking about taking on the insurance companies. You cannot have Medicare for all unless we have the guts to take on the insurance companies. We're going to take on the drug companies and lower prices in this country. They have an endless. Last year, the 5 major drug companies made $50 billion in profits. And 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford their medicine. They have unlimited amounts of money. We're going to take them on. We're going to take on the military-industrial complex. And they got lobbyists all over Washington. Lobbyists all over Washington want more and more money for the military. We're going to take on agribusiness and the concentration of ownership in agriculture. We're going to take on the prison industrial complex, the fossil fuel industry. And a corrupt finance system that allows billionaires to buy elections. Now, these guys, and I have dealt with these entities for years, they have literally unlimited amounts of money. They're going to be flooding the airways. They're going to be telling you how dangerous Bernie Sanders is, all the terrible things he's going to do. Okay? Now, they got unlimited amounts of money. They own a lot of the media, etc. But there is one thing that we have that they don't have, and that is we have the people. Now, the political formula of Trump and his friends is to try to divide us up. But I believe from the bottom of my heart that if we stand together and not let Trump divide us up, if we understand that there is no such thing as a blue state or a red state, that in fact in every state in this country, blue or red, the reality is that working people are struggling to create a decent life for themselves and their kids. Brothers and sisters, I want to welcome you to an unprecedented campaign which intends not only to win this election, but to transform this country. Thank you all very much.